When you think of metro systems, do you think of Buenos Aires? I'd venture to guess not. But you probably should, as Buenos Aires has one of the oldest and most interesting underground systems in the world that opened all the way back in 1913. So let's dive in and see what makes it so special. Hey there, I'm Reece and this is RMTransit. For more videos on old and interesting transit systems from around the world, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Buenos Aires, Argentina is actually an enormous city region with over 15 million residents, located on the shores of the Rio de la Plata in South America. The city is well known for its diverse old European architecture and its grand public spaces, like the Plaza de Mayo, and broad streets like July 9th Avenue. The city is also known for its lush parks, such as those located in the Palermo district, that contain raceways, botanical gardens, sports pitches, as well as museums and a planetarium. To the east of the city center is the Costanero Sur Nature Reserve, directly abutting the modern Porto Madero waterfront neighborhood. To the south of the area near Constitution Plaza is Constitution, the largest train station in Argentina, and the terminus for a web of suburban railways cutting across the region. Just to the north of this area, adjacent to the General San Martin Plaza and the traditional central business district, is Retiro, which rather than a single station is actually 3 adjacent independent terminals for 3 separate suburban railways. The last major terminal in the city is Once, which lies west of the city center. The various suburban rail lines in Buenos Aires, which go beyond the city-state itself, probably justify a video on their own, having pretty good service and a hodgepodge of different rail gauges and power systems, from meter gauge to broad 1676mm tracks, and diesel to third rail and AC overhead wire power. Trains vary with a mix of legacy diesel locomotives, diesel multiple units, modern high-capacity electrical multiple units, and even a tram train route, and the network is developing with major infrastructure improvement projects ongoing, including massive new viaducts, grade separations, line extensions, and more, including bringing the southern meter gauge line the rest of the way to Constitution and station reconstructions. Buenos Aires also has 2 major airports, but unfortunately neither of them are connected to the railway network, so I won't spend too much time talking about them. As you might imagine, Buenos Aires, like many other Latin American cities, also has a BRT system. This one is relatively modest in scope with 5 corridors used by all manner of different bus routes, but the Metrobus system makes up for that with its decidedly less modest 1 million riders per day, with service connecting various neighborhoods across the city to suburban rail and the metro. And so with that, let's talk about the metro, which in Buenos Aires is known as Subte. The Subte network is fascinating because it has been a slow and steady build-out since the original opening in 1913 until present, with 90 stations stretching over 60 kilometers of track, which isn't nothing, but is obviously inadequate given the size of the city. Now, Subte is really interesting because it is a system of contrast between the old and the new. Opening in 1913 by a private company, Buenos Aires had a subway before Barcelona, Moscow, or Tokyo. In fact, it was the first subway in the Spanish-speaking world, and the city has a history of old and just otherwise eclectic subway rolling stock. For one, the original trains on the system from 1913 were used all the way until 2013, and today, cars operating on the network include older Madrid Metro 6000 series cars and even old Tokyo Metro Marunouchi cars from the 1950s. In fact, in its history, Subte has had almost 20 different train models, and currently the network has 7 models operating on just 6 different lines. Like the wacky makeup of the train fleet, the stations on the network are something special, with distinct eras visible through the slow and steady network expansion, from century-old stations that look like they'd be right at home in Paris or New York, to ones that look like they might be from another planet. What's common across the whole network is excellent architecture and intriguing integrated in-station art. In some ways, the network is actually more modern than many. For example, the Subte fare card used on the system can actually be used across Argentina. The network also has incredible modern wayfinding, branding, and design, with the Subte entrance signs honestly being some of my favorite in the world. Diving into the lines on Subte themselves, we can generally divide them into 2 categories: radial lines heading from central areas outwards, and orbital lines circling the city. Let's start with the radial lines, the first of which is Line A, which was the first line to open back in 1913 as a city center tram tunnel, and now has 16 stations on roughly 11 kilometers of track. The line runs east-west from Plaza de Mayo to Once, and beyond to Caballito and Flores. The second line on the network to open was Line B in 1930. Line B is the most used line on the system with 17 stations over roughly 12 kilometers of track, and it runs east-west as with Line A, starting from the edge of the modern waterfront before turning northwest as it continues west to the Urquiza neighborhood. As it turns out, Line B's longtime terminus of Federico La Croce is also the eastern terminus of the 26-kilometer, 23-station Urquiza Suburban Rail line, which was actually long operated on the same concession agreement as the Subte lines. The line also has the track connections, standard gauge tracks, and third rail power necessary to through run onto Line B. However, this has never regularly happened. Thus, the Urquiza line, which given its suburban nature has level crossings and lower frequencies, has always operated independently from Line B. As it turns out, those track connections were originally implemented so that freight trains serving a market along the line could use the Line B tunnels. While all Subte lines have standard gauge tracks, the 600-volt DC third rail power on Line B is unique, with all other lines using 1500-volt DC overhead line power. This was all part of a rather big debacle when the Madrid metro cars imported for use on the line, which like all metro cars in Spain use overhead line power, required the installation of overhead lines on Line B, as well as other modifications for use in service, all resulting in old, poorly suited trains being used on the line that ended up being more expensive than simply buying new, purpose-built trains, which can show the risk of trying to come up with a complex scheme to save money with transit procurement. Line D opened in 1937 and now had 16 stations on 11 kilometers of track, starting near Plaza de Mayo in the east and heading northwest to Palermo, serving a major university campus and popular neighborhoods like Belgrano and Plaza Italia along the way. The last radial line is the 12-kilometer 18-station Line E, which originally ran from the west into Constitution before being rerouted past Plaza de Mayo and eventually to Retiro, in an attempt to increase its ridership, which is the lowest on the network. At its western end, which extends to Flores, there is a connection to the pre-metro line denoted P, which extends 7.5 kilometers further to the southwest with 17 stops and branches serving a massive housing development and a large park. In addition to the 4 radial lines, Subte also has 2 orbital lines. The first of these is Line C, which opened in 1934 with just a little more than 4 kilometers of track and 9 stops, providing a link between Retiro and Constitution, as well as connecting to lines A, B, D, and E along the way. Line C until recently used second-hand Nagoya subway cars, which despite being second-hand were fully walk-through, something that's not even true on new subway cars in some parts of the world. The line is extremely busy given its length, with over 200,000 riders per day mostly entering at the terminals and riding on to their final destinations. The last line on Subte, and the newest, opening in 2007, is Line H, which provides an orbital service farther west in the city connecting to Once Station and lines A, B, D, and E, with 12 stations on 9 kilometers of track. As you can see, Subte is a really interesting system that reminds me a lot of Spanish metros, given it's entirely underground, generally uses overhead line power, has tight stop spacings, and has smallish trains that are generally around 100 meters long and 2.6 meters wide, with the exception of Line B, which uses wider mainline-sized cars. Unfortunately, there isn't any major expansion work under construction on the network, although extensions of Line H, 1 station south, and north to Retiro are planned to be completed this decade, although locals are less than optimistic that that'll happen. If an extension does happen, it will reduce the strains on other lines of the network, providing a direct connection between Once and Retiro stations. Clearly there's a need for far more expansion though, given the modest size of the existing network, and the insatiable demand for urban transport in the city, with the existing metro moving close to 1.5 million riders per day. Part of the problem here is jumping the jurisdictional boundary beyond the city of Buenos Aires itself. At the moment, one line is planned, known as Line F, which, if built, should align with other metros in Latin America, such as Sao Paulo Line 4 and Santiago Line 6, with automated trains, platform screen doors, and super high frequency. Fortunately, the network's lack of expansion has not meant a lack of improvement. Instead, in recent decades, Subte has seen its branding, stations, and wayfinding modernized, something which is ongoing with periodic station closures, enhanced infrastructure, and new digital signaling that allows higher train frequencies than ever on most lines. There are also new trains from Chinese manufacturer CNR and Alstom, which are modern in features and appearance, and should provide a nicer, more standardized fleet going forwards. However, there are bigger plans afoot in Buenos Aires. Most notably, there's been talk of electrifying the rest of the suburban rail lines, bringing the last few to the major urban terminals, and connecting the terminals in a scheme similar to the Paris RER, with a new line to the waterfront from Once and new tunnels connecting the broad and meter gauge rail lines between Retiro and Constitution, with a massive underground interchange connecting to lines B, C, and D of the metro at Obelisco. So that's Buenos Aires, a city with a historic metro that's well used, and likely to be much larger and better in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. A special thanks to Maddie and Mateo for their help and footage used in this video.